I think I think we're ready to start. Welcome to season 3 of the Baskin School of Engineering Diverse Voices Speaker Series. We're very happy that you've joined us this evening. My name is Abigail Kahn, she, her, hers. I'm the executive advisor to the Dean of Engineering here at UC Santa Cruz. And I want to thank the rest of the team that works to put together the Diverse Voices series. Carmen Robinson, Lindy Boisvert, Adi Weinstein, Melissa Baker, great colleagues. I also want to thank our associate, Jody Crutchfield, who will be providing the closed captioning for tonight's event. And I believe that we're being joined by our dean, Alexander Wolf, either now or soon. So welcome, Alex. So I have just a few things to say about the how the event's going to run, and then I get to introduce our wonderful speaker. So just a few technical notes. We're hoping to have plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation, and I really want to encourage you to post questions. Just put them in the chat, and my colleague Carmen Robinson will be monitoring those questions, and she'll read them aloud at the relevant point in the evening for our speaker. Please know that no questions are too basic or too out there. Whatever you're wondering about, somebody else is probably wondering the same thing. And even if they're not, it's a question worth asking. So please just ask away. And I mentioned before that the event is being closed captioned. So you should be able to access closed captioning at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, that's it. So on to tonight's speaker. Tonight's speaker is Mothusi Pahl. Mothusi is one of 2 entrepreneurs in residence here at UC Santa Cruz. They're the first to hold this role. And I'm hoping that Mothusi will talk a little bit about the programming that the entrepreneurs have put in place, especially CruzX, which is the social network for UCSC innovators, entrepreneurs, and change makers. CruzX has really, really valuable posts for students and others. With internships, jobs. Some of those are exclusive to UC Santa Cruz students. Great advice for entrepreneurs and new founders, information about cool events. And just today I saw a post with information about a new course called Hacking for Oceans. So it's really a great platform and one that we should all be engaging in if we can. And you can write to Mothusi or to me, and we'll send you an invitation to CruzX. So about Mothusi, he describes himself as a thought leader at the intersection of technology and heavy industry. He has an MBA from the Yale University School of Management. He's currently the president of UAV Recon, which helps companies, utility companies and businesses find the most cost-effective ways to use drones to optimize their business operations. He is also the chief commercial officer for B3Bar. That's a private equity firm dedicated to tech and tech-enabled services. Mothusi does a bunch of volunteer work, but one of which is to serve on the board of directors of GNR, or Give and Receive, which is a diversity-focused startup community for early-stage, non-traditional founding teams that are working on B2B problems in France. And I said that was volunteer work. I made that assumption, but that might be incorrect. But he serves on their board. I could go on. There's plenty to say about Mothusi, but you're here to hear Mothusi talk about Mothusi. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Mothusi Pahl. Mothusi, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. And Abigail, thank you very much for the introduction. I think there's a good segue there in terms of background around the work that we're doing on campus and in my role as entrepreneur in residence under the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurial Development. And I would strongly encourage everybody on the call who has particular interest in innovation entrepreneurship to reach out, to ping me. My email address is mothusi@ucsc.edu. You can also find me on LinkedIn. The core of the work, and I mean, forgive me for just digging into the innovation entrepreneurship stuff for just a moment before I go into the core of the diverse voices topic. The bulk of the work that I'm really interested in as an entrepreneur in residence is encouraging our broader community to understand and appreciate that innovation entrepreneurship means different things for different people, that there isn't one single definition of it. And I think we as a society and as a culture often make the mistake of assuming that it is engineering, that it is computer science, that it has to be IT and it has to be something newly coded for it to qualify in kind of our modern era of kind of what we popularize as being innovation entrepreneurship. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of my, in many ways, kind of alternative path into the space. But as an EIR, I try to spend as much time in the art history department and in the women's studies department and in environmental sciences and in the social sciences, because the ideas and the frameworks that we use for encouraging founding teams are from my experience, are as important in program and project development as they are in getting a software company off the ground. As important as it may be to start, if you're, starting a reading circle, if you're starting a kids after school program, all of them require a core set of skills around kind of thinking out of the established norm, kind of communicating your objectives to your community, finding sponsors and selling partners, recruiting talent. All of them fall under this umbrella of, as a founder, this is what you do all day, every day. So as an EIR, I'm trying to kind of dust off a lot of those assumptions and encourage a lot of alternative perspectives to come to the table and to take the risk of jumping into this entrepreneurial journey. And Abigail mentioned CruzX. CruzX is the social media platform that we've put together for UCSC's entrepreneurship community. It is an open space, a safe space for our student and faculty founders to swap ideas, to look for help, to network. And really what we're trying to impress upon UCSC as a whole is the idea that success in the startup world doesn't come from the individual. It requires an individual behind the scenes working hard, but at the end of the day, it's a group effort. And the universities and the institutions that have the strongest and most successful startup programs find that strength in the network. It's not in the individual, it's in the network, because each of these individuals are relying on other individuals to help kind of break through the logjam, to commiserate, to swap notes on venture capitalists, and to help look for first customers. So on that note, I'm going to dive into my presentation. So I would like to just kind of for context here, the reason Abigail originally invited me in for this discussion was because I think I have a fairly unique experience at post UC Santa Cruz, not so much in the technology space, because I think there are lots of people that are doing technology work, but because a lot of my work has been in heavy industry, and a lot of it has been engineering focused, but I don't have an engineering degree. I graduated with an econ degree and a minor in math. Was supposed to have a math major, and I'll get to I'll get to the kind of the backstory there. But I have a long career in running engineering organizations, bringing technology to market in engineering intensive industries, and a number of patents that I hold myself that are not as a result of coming out of an engineering program. So while I know that a lot of people, if not the majority of the people on the call, are coming from engineering backgrounds, I would use this to kind of help frame the discussion, to help kind of understand the thought processes and the approaches that I've taken in my career to bring kind of this non-traditional Santa Cruz perspective into a number of heavy industry operating environments where I know for a fact I was able to differentiate myself because I could see things differently. Because I didn't understand the things the same way that everybody else understood them, which means I was asking questions that got me to kind of epiphanies and realizations that accelerated my career path over the last 20 years or so. So as Abigail mentioned, right now I have three kind of parallel appointments. Number one, I'm a chief commercial officer and operating partner at a private equity firm called B3Bar Holdings. B3Bar is focused on energy infrastructure and utilities and software and services that make those individual verticals more efficient. And then just since January, took over one of our portfolio companies that's focused on turnkey inspection of high voltage electrical transmission, distribution, and substation infrastructure. So an extremely, extremely technical field that I have yet again kind of parachuted into. So I hope to share some anecdotes there. And that leads me to the next slide, which is I'm going to I have 10 slides here. I'm going to break it up into 4 different stories. And hopefully that'll help kind of weave or kind of bridge the transitions and the narrative here. So we've got 4 stories that we're going to go through. And the soundtrack that you're likely to hear in the background are my 5-year-old and 11-year-old rampaging around the house. So I should probably have another square up there for kids, but we'll go with 4 for now. So between these 4 stories, there are 5 core themes that I'm going to keep coming back to, and if I had to distill, and actually down at the end of the presentation, I'm going to distill everything down into 5 key points. So there will be a quiz on this at the end, but it's really around being opportunistic, that life doesn't always happen to you when you were planning on it happening, and paying attention enough and listening and watching to figure out when the time is right for you to make your move. You're being willing to make that move, to know when you make those moves, you may not have all the resources that you wanted. So being scrappy and being able to make the most of what you have, that you've got to have the confidence, but also the humility to be able to push forward and to ask for help when you need it. And then probably most importantly out of all of it, the perspective that I came in with, and kind of honoring that perspective and trusting that perspective, and pushing back on other people when the time was right. Those are 5 things that have served me well, and we'll revisit those at several points here through the presentation. So in kind of to start all this off in truly non-engineer fashion, I spent 5 years, both full-time and part-time, working as a whitewater river guide. And in that time, boated over 3,000 miles. And I like to, I don't tell other people about this, but really to me, I think like the most important things I learned in my life I learned as a river guide. And being able to deal with the constantly changing environment of being out on a river, managing people where you can't get away from them, and being in really dangerous situations and trying to, keep a level head and figure out how to work through it. The river rafting stuff was key. And I would start off here. I can thank UC Santa Cruz for this. My senior year, I went to the OPER's office, the on-campus kind of PE and physical education resource center, and said, I'm interested in whitewater rafting. I don't know where to start. I knew that one of the people who worked at OPER's had been a river guide in the past. And I said, the baddest ass river guides that you ever met, like, where did they start? And they gave me some numbers. I called a few people and I asked them, the best that you ever met, where did they start? And I found common ground in this group that was based up in Mount Shasta. And I got into their guide class. It was the first week of spring quarter at Santa Cruz. And I was like, I'll miss spring quarter. It'll be fine. Let me go out and raft some rivers for a week. And day one, they're like, no, man, we're not rafting anything. We're swimming. Because if you're too afraid to swim a rapid, there's a high probability that your customers will be swimming these rapids if you don't know how to raft them. So to respect the river, you're going to swim them first. And that, for me, has manifested in so many different ways over the course of my life. Like, as a manager, kind of understanding what your people and understanding what your customers are dealing with is really key. It was really key. And that was like day one, day two, day three of guide school was just a lot. It was a lot of swimming, and it wasn't swimming in the pool. It was swimming in spaces where you're like, should we really be in there? But getting comfortable with that as your operating environment. The second one of these things that I learned as a guide was what we call rig to flip. That you never pack a boat like you pack a car. Like, you pack your boat with knowing that your boat's going to flip. Like, you don't know if it's going to flip on this trip or the next trip, or maybe you're going to flip 5 times on this trip. But the point is, as mundane as it may be, everything that goes into your boat, you want it bolted down, or else you end up with what we called a yard sale, which was your gear, your client's gear, people's food, their blankets, their tents, your supplies will end up all over the river. And again, kind of the application in the workspace and in the design space and in how we think about like systems and kind of process thinking, that your plan needs to have contingencies in it, and things aren't going to go as planned, and things aren't always going to go well. But be sure that you've rigged your boat to flip. The third one here is what we call the chub sub. On long trips, and by the end of my first season as a river guide, I actually got called up to start working in the Grand Canyon. And in river guiding circles, the Grand Canyon is, that's division 1. That as a rookie working the Grand Canyon, you have to row what's called the chub sub. And the chub sub is a polite name for the boat that hauls out everybody's excrement. In the Grand Canyon, there are enough people that go through in a year where you can't just like dig a hole and bury people's mess. You've got to haul it out. And as a rookie guide in the Grand Canyon, it's the rookie guide's job to haul the boat. Everybody else's boat gets lighter over the course of the trip. But as the chub sub, you're rowing the boat that gets heavier over the course of the trip for obvious reasons. And being willing and able and understanding that was part of the course really helped me in my professional career. And then the last one is what we call river juju. And I had one of my first bosses as a river guide told me, said something to the effect of, I would rather have a lucky guide than a good guide any day of the week, because good guides and bad luck have bad outcomes, but okay guides who have great luck end up with good outcomes. And the idea that a lot of what's going to happen over your career is out of your control. A lot is in your control, but that you've got to be ready when the time is right. And you also have to be ready when the time is wrong. And that's what, when I say the juju, we called it river juju. And those were kind of the 4 mantras that led me into the bigger stuff. So let's go into that other stuff now. First slide in major professional career is blank, and it's blank there on purpose. My first real job, believe it or not, was as an investment banker. I worked in structured finance, covered major debt issues for the state of California. I did a lot of infrastructure finance work, but it's blank here because I did not like it. I was bored stiff, and in a society where we give people so much credit for work in finance, and people who, we look at management consultants and investment bankers like, they're the top of the crop. I think it's actually really shallow. And that's why I left it blank here. I spent 4 years doing it and knew that I needed to get out because I wanted something more than just a spreadsheet. And what came out of my time there were 2 things there that were particularly useful for me. One, I participated in a fellowship, a public policy fellowship with the Coro Center for Public Policy in San Francisco. And that really opened my eyes to my colleagues within my cohort at Coro were all Brown, Princeton, NYU, and Harvard. And coming out of Santa Cruz and coming out of the family of pretty modest means, I'd never really interacted with people in those circles before. And it was in my cohort at Coro where I realized that I'm as good as any of these people. So why am I why am I it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't, rather than aiming low, it was more a question of why am I not aiming higher? And why am I not aiming and thinking like these people are in terms of what I should expect next? And that led me directly to applying to Yale for graduate school. Yale was the only school I applied to. So Yale was the only school I got into. And of course I went, and Yale was what propelled me into the world of intense engineering and heavy industry. And first stop was at Cummins Diesel. I was recruited by Cummins to help lead their strategy and corporate development group within their power generation division. That led to an appointment in Southern Africa, where I took on the title of assistant general manager for retail power generation, and also joint venture work with big companies like Komatsu that were really focused on the mining industry. Because of some attrition internally, that quickly led me into a role of general manager of all of Southern Africa, which meant that I was running our single largest business unit was power engineering. And power engineering was servicing one of the largest mining companies in the world called Sumitomo. And one of our other huge kind of work bases was in Angola with the largest the primary oil and gas company in Angola called Sonangol. And voila, It's like game on in engineering, in the engineering world. That the customers I'm meeting with are dealing with world-class technical challenges. They're dealing with operations challenges. They're dealing with personnel challenges. They're dealing with systems challenges. They're dealing with emerging market challenges where the tools and the components they need aren't readily available. And really, in my mind, how I like to frame a lot of this work that I was doing at Cummins was, I mean, across this power band of we were literally deploying turnkey power projects for modular, like 40 megawatt power stations at this image here in the middle for Sumitomo. That is an image of a facility called Ambitovi. It's the at the time it was the largest. Now it's, I think, the second largest nickel mine in the world. Combination nickel and cobalt. There is no power infrastructure on that side of Madagascar, and my team won the contract to build the power plants that brought and to this day are bringing tens of thousands of tons of nickel to the world every year. And for those of you with kind of chemistry inclinations, so much of the technology world that we live in today and that we are growing into is heavily reliant on nickel. So it's not just for steel production, but also for batteries and computer systems. And it totally blows my mind that I ended up leading the team that built several of the power plants that fire up this project in Madagascar. The kind of coming full circle, the image in the far left there with Komatsu. It was interesting while I was in these Komatsu images are from a mine up in northern Zambia. That while I was over there we were doing kind of technical integration where these mining trucks were originally all diesel powered. And a lot of those mine trucks are moving to, or even then we're moving to kind of hybrid electrical power. That we were doing systems integration work to like literally embedding generators into these haul trucks. But there were Santa Cruz people who were over in Zambia on Peace Corps assignments, while I was over there doing big dirty work and trying to make haul trucks less polluting. And it was just a really cool kind of juxtaposition of, both of us on our kind of parallel paths in emerging markets, doing a lot of development work, doing a lot of kind of innovative work in emissions reductions. But in my mind, and this is kind of philosophically the approach that I've taken has been that I want to go to where the problem is the hardest, where the problem is the most acute. And if I'm looking for projects to tackle or ideas to kind of gestate in the brain, that like if we're talking about emissions, why would I want to go in a neighborhood and talk about emissions to a group where everybody's already driving a Prius? Like, why not go to a refinery where one location is generating as much emissions as the entire Western United States? If I can make an impact there, then to me, like that material effect, I get a lot more bang for my buck. So that was kind of what wedded me to this idea of, oh, I found this interesting niche. I understand how these heavy industry spaces work. What can I do next with it? After that stint in Southern Africa, wife and I moved back to the Bay Area with, at the time, our infant son. I got recruited to help a group here in the Bay Area that was actually licensing some technology out of Lawrence Berkeley around thermoelectrics, which are solid state or semiconductors that can generate electricity across a temperature gradient. And we were working on the idea of doing power generation off of exhaust stacks. And I was the primary contributor that really drove the all of our development work in and around engines and combustors. And sorry, I have a guy coming in here to sharpen his pencil. So I apologize for the pencil sharpener noise that's about to come on in the background. So the piece here about engines was immediately relevant to my prior work on these haul trucks, because that's exactly where we were deploying. Hold on a second. I think that's good enough. Thank you. Sorry. We were building exhaust systems to go on to big trucks like these haul trucks. We were building waste heat recovery devices to go on exhaust stacks at refineries. And then most of my contributions, and then later on kind of commercialization work, is around was around flares in the oil and gas industry, and the systems that were eventually acquired by a number of oil field services companies like Schlumberger that were converting those flares into solid state power generators. So I mean, the thing kind of that connected me to Santa Cruz through all of this was really prioritizing what a lot of people saw as not primary, like not core to their business. They're like, yeah, I've got a big truck. My objective for for this truck is to haul a bunch of iron ore, or in this case of Zambia, copper ore, and nothing else is important to me. I just need this system to be reliable. And my coming in with my Santa Cruz hat was, yeah, okay, I understand that's what you want to do, but there are some kind of systemic implications of kind of your business motivation. And if I can hold true to the thing that's most important to you, can I tack these other things on? If I've got a priority here around emissions or around fuel efficiency, if that's what's important to me, can I build a business around kind of reconciling what's important to me with what's important to you and making a business case in between? And that's really the space where I've operated the last several years. So I've got two more stories here. The next one is in moving out of Alphabet Energy and waste heat recovery, moving into this. Sounds like a stretch, but it actually was very consistent with what was doing prior in terms of the waste heat recovery and the mining and the oil and gas space. And that was really in helping these large corporations with distributed assets in remote corners of the globe better understand their field operations. And co-founder and I launched a company called Undocka that was really focused on heavy industry and critical infrastructure, but with really first mover advantages in the oil and gas space. And what we were really driving the market was what we call data contextualization. And for all of the IoT work that's underway, for all of the GIS work that's underway, for all of the data science work that's underway, the argument here at Undocka was that humans are largely visual creatures. So to help operating and engineering teams come to better decisions faster, if they can see the assets that all of this data relates to, that it would be easier for them to remember and act on and share within their groups. Lo and behold, this kind of Santa Cruz perspective on maybe it is actually important that people see this, wasn't really so novel. And over a period of 2 years, the kind of leading arbiters in the space, whether that's the Society of Petroleum Engineers or the Journal of Petroleum Technologies, or the kind of the single largest oil and gas conference and trade show in the world, we got all of these awards where people were like, "Man, that's a really interesting idea. You know, why didn't we think about that?" And I can tell you why they didn't think about it, because they weren't thinking like non-engineers. They weren't thinking like a, Mothusi wearing the Santa Cruz hat of, yeah, I understand that's the way you're doing it, but there's probably a better way. Or I understand that's the way you're doing it, but maybe we could consider some other things. So last piece here, this takes you into the most most recent phase of what I've been up to. After Undocka, this group B3Bar approached me and said, a lot of the commercialization work that you've been doing in and around energy technologies and waste heat recovery, and most recently in the field of data contextualization in the oil and gas industry. We have a number of portfolio companies that are on similar trajectories. Would you help them commercialize their technologies? And I never had any intention of working in private equity. And voila, that's where I am. And I never had any intention of taking on a drone and aerial data capture and crowdsourced data analytics company. But as a result of the management team of the private equity fund pushing out the management team of one of the portfolio companies, I was tapped to lead this company called UAV Recon. And that's where I'm spending the bulk of my time these days. And this is an incredibly nuanced and technical space that, I mean, I didn't know anything about electrical infrastructure other than the power lines outside of my house. But now I have an engineering team. Now I have a team of linemen. And now I have a machine learning team that are doing all the analytics around all of the data capture that my team of pilots spend their day out in the field taking images of. And it's actually a really cool platform. My intention here, we have some internal software that we are in continual development around. But what we're really doing is enabling turnkey inspection as a service for electrical utilities, where anybody with a drone can go up and fly, take photographs, upload those images to the cloud to our software. And our software works as this inspection workflow management tool, where we automate the categorization of images to different structure types. And then we allocate those images to approximately 200 linemen that are scattered around the United States that have qualifications at different levels of electrical infrastructure. And those linemen scale up or scale down depending on the volume of work that we're pushing them on any given day of the week. And the outcome to our client is a prioritized workflow that just says, you have 10,000 structures in your network. Of those 10,000, 200 of them are going to fail in the next 6 months because of these issues. And we can prioritize them. We can geolocate them. We can tell them what components need to be replaced, how much those component costs are going to be. And then we run some nifty analytics to kind of compare them against their peers in the industry. But the point is, what I'm trying to share with each of you here is that I have never in my career angled for really technical or engineering intensive roles, but I've kind of carved out I've carved out a space there. And I've also never, and I don't know how to say this exactly, but in many ways, like I've never applied for a job and got a job that I was on paper qualified for. I mean, think about that for a second. I mean, there's no way that, if I were the hiring committee for a big mine out in one of the far-flung corners of planet Earth, that Mothusi would be the one to call on to work on to lead the team for power systems integrations for large mining haul trucks. But I did. Nor was I the person who should have been building these power plants, but I did. And probably shouldn't have been the person who was building waste heat recovery systems for oil and gas flares in North Dakota and Texas, but I was. And if I can do it, there's no reason why people who know engineering a hell of a lot better than I do can't do it. But to be able to do it, there are a few things that you've got to take away, and then I'm gonna stop talking. Number one is, one of my early mentors told me, in terms of your career, there are 5 paths that you can take. Number one is you pick a functional area, and you follow that function. Wherever you get the job, wherever you get a job, you move to that job, you move to that location and take it. The other option is you join a company, and then whatever that company wants you to work on, or wherever they want to send you, you take it. The other option is geographically, which means that you're less wedded to a company, but you just want to stay in a region. So whatever jobs present themselves that you can get in that region, you take it. The other option is to hitch your saddle or your harness to a person who is on a really accelerated trajectory, and you tie yourself to that person and you do whatever it takes to enable that person, and you become part of that person's trajectory. And then the last option is more industry focused, where you're really tied to specific use cases within a specific industry. I already mentioned earlier that I didn't think qualification, everybody talks about, being amply qualified, but at the end of the day, I'm saying, like, I didn't, in my case, that wasn't really where I thought what really enabled success. I mentioned before, being able to swim, rig to flip, and then being willing to row boats that don't always smell great. I talked about being opportunistic, scrappy, and confident. And then that last takeaway is around perspective, that I think the time that you've spent at Santa Cruz and your ability to think a little bit differently than the rest of your colleagues out there, those are going to be absolutely critical. They were for me, and don't underestimate them in your activity going forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Carmen. I was going to flip it over to you. I also wanted to just, first of all, thank you, Mothusi. That was really fantastic. I wanted to correct something I said earlier. Our closed captioning is being done by our colleague Maggie Weber. Forgive me, Maggie, for the wrong introduction. Carmen, I'll send it to you for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Abigail. So we have a few questions for you. Our first question is first thanking you for your candid, insightful presentation. We thank you for that. But also, can you say something about how your international experience influenced your perspective?
I think where that has been of greatest value is in commercializing commercializing technologies and understanding more than just kind of day-to-day operations in the US. So I would say it's less about the fact of it being international and more of it just being in really diverse operating environments. In clocking in time in challenging spaces where a lot of people are afraid to go, you definitely get a leg up. So it's not international for the sake of being international as much as it is understanding nuance in spaces where a lot of people are ignorant.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Can you talk about how you've been managing and weathering the global pandemic and the shelter in place, both personally and professionally, and for you and with yourself and for your loved ones?
I think my loved ones have had to deal with me more. That's probably the most significant thing is just them dealing with me being around more than I normally would. But in general, the timing of the pandemic has been pretty opportune for me in this move over to a SaaS business. So we've really been working on rejiggering our sales cycle, our sales process, and our marketing materials to kind of leverage this new world of customer concerns and how they're thinking about their businesses. So it's less around how our business is changing and more around how we're messaging our business changes.
Great, thank you. Another question that says, based on takeaway number 2, do you think talent acquisition practices in general need to change?
I think talent acquisition is a joke. I think it is random, arbitrary, biased, and a complete disaster. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Another question is, if I were interested in creating a startup, where do I start? How do you find the investors?
Problem number 1 is that you're focused on finding the investors. That should not be your priority. Your priority should be demonstrating that there's a market for what you want to do. Like, why would you want to raise money for something if you don't know if people want it or not? So you don't need money to figure out if people want it or not. Figure out some proxy for validating that consumer behavior, or get people to pre-order and give you money for something that you want to build. That's the strongest validation of consumer behavior out there. And after you've booked a bunch of customers, and hopefully some of them have paid for it in advance, then I would turn around and go try to raise some money. But I wouldn't do it before then.
That's great advice. So another question is, if you don't have connections with people in the tech industry, what first steps can you take to establish connections?
Position yourself as a thought leader in something. There's something that you know better than most everybody else. So write about it, and build up enough of a portfolio there of content that you've posted, that it kind of serves as a validation marker or like a signpost, and then start networking, reaching out to people on LinkedIn and sharing what you're thinking and how you're thinking. And I think there's an opportunity there to find out, am I on the deep end, or am I actually finding some other people here who are validating what I'm thinking? But I wouldn't jump in and start pinging them without laying that groundwork, because without that groundwork, you're just another person. But if you've put in the time and effort to show that you're on the forefront and asking questions that should be of interest to these people who you want to have as your peers, that's how I would do it.
Great, thank you. I have another question. What are some notable books you have read that shifted some of your perspectives?
I'm gonna look over my shoulder back here, because there are a whole bunch that I have different stacks. I have the stacks of the ones that I go to regularly, and then there are the ones that I go to irregularly, but I still got to keep them out. So I'm not gonna put them in any particular order, and it's gonna be a mix. But one of the most important ones is the 4 Steps to the Epiphany. That really changed how I thought about product and market development. Number 2 is Clayton Christensen. His framework called Jobs to be Done, and the writings that he did around jobs to be done was really, really formative to me. I just, right around the Christmas holidays, read Cast, and I know that's not a business book, but it blew my mind. As a Black man in America, I mean, there's so much there that I knew, but didn't really couldn't put a name to it. And reading about that, and then kind of this earlier question around recruiting and personnel, reading Cast really changed a lot of my thinking around people and how we internalize these differences, and whether or not we're conscious of our understanding of differences between people. So those would be a few. If you want more, drop me a note, and I'll be happy to send you kind of Mothusi's reading list. I'm looking over here on the shelf behind my monitor to see what else. I'm in the middle of reading Winners Take All. I'll let you know how it finishes.
Okay. That's great. And Cast is by Isabel Wilkerson, if anyone's interested in that book. I think we have time for maybe one more question. So have you been able to incorporate social justice and environmental sustainability into the heavy industries you've been involved with? If yes, in what ways?
Every single project that I've taken on has been, that's been at the core of it. So in what ways? A lot of my projects have been around emissions control, have been around more efficient use of hydrocarbons. A lot of the work has been around reducing the number of trips that field service personnel take out to remote locations. So everything maps back to emissions reduction. I just happen to do that work in the middle of the dirtiest industries on the planet.
That's great. I think that's all the questions that we have here, that we have time for.
Great. So Carmen, thank you for that, managing that Q&A, and Mothusi, thank you so much for all of this incredible insight. And we usually in Diverse Voices don't have somebody who's part of UC Santa Cruz presenting. Occasionally we do, but it's really nice to know that you're one of our entrepreneurs in residence. So we'll have all of us still have access to you and your wealth of ideas and experience. So thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And
Absolutely.
Thanks to everybody who participated and came. We're glad you were part of this, and we'll see you for the next episode. So thank you.